It's a Friday, which of course means the Gran Turismo 7 weekly challenges have refreshed, and to kick things off this week, we head over to Monza in an iconic French hot hatch. We then head over to France and Alsace for some JDM car action, featuring a bunch of iconic JDM machinery, before heading over to America and Laguna Seca with the iconic corkscrew for this week's special event, the returning Honda N1 RS1 make. After that, we head over once again to France to Circuit de Saint-Creux for some very close Nissan GT-R racing. And to finish off the week, we go for one of the latest events to GT7 from 1.62, the 10-lap Spa WTC 900, featuring some very tricky conditions. But before we get into this video, I'm trying to get this channel to 70,000 subscribers. So if you want to stay up to date with everything Gran Turismo 7 and motorsport gaming related, then feel free to leave a like, subscribe, and turn your notifications on. Anyway, let's get to it. So let's have a look at an overview for September week 2 then. This will end on the 18th of September 2025 at midnight your time. As for race number 1, this is the Sunday Cup Classic at Monza. This one is of course aimed at some of the slower, more classic vehicles in the game, with a PP recommendation of 350. We then move over to Alsace Village Reverse for the Japanese Clubman Cup 550, of course aimed at Japanese cars, around 550 PP. We then have the returning Honda N1 RS1 make Cup car race at WeatherTech Raceway Laguna Seca, of course returning for the second time, previous at Suzuka. Then we have the Nissan GT-R Cup. Very fitting to say the Nissan GT-R production has finally ended. That one takes place at Circuit de Saint-Creux A. And then we have one of the newer events to the game, the WTC 900 at Spa. For finishing one event it's 100k, for 3 events it's 200k, and for all 5 is 500,000 credits. So let's get into race number 1 this week then, the Sunday Cup Classic at Monza. Of course this being aimed at slower classic vehicles, we're of course going to be around that PP rating with that kind of type of vehicle I guess. So my car of choice here would be the Peugeot 205. Although the recommendation is 350, this one sits at just under 400 PP, completely standard. Now as for the race then, there is a total of 12 cars on the grid over a 2-lap sprint of Monza with the chicane on. Now as for the mix of cars that are on the grid, mainly the faster ones are the likes of the Golf GTI and the Alfa Romeo Giulia, as well as kind of the Citroen DS Palace. As for the rest of them, it's made up of a bunch of incredibly slow vehicles, anything from the Samba buses, Beetles, and of course the Fiat 500. Now honestly, I don't think anybody will struggle with this one. I do have it set to the highest difficulty and I found this incredibly easy. The only really difficult thing about the event is the fact that the lead Alfa Romeo does tend to have such a massive head start over the rest of the field that it's going to be that single car you're probably going to be chasing down in comparison to anything else. Of course, this being Italy, it kind of makes sense. But still, we managed to chase him down as we went across the line onto lap 2, and from there we would just then build up the lead for that final second lap. Of course, crossing the line with relative ease and honestly no competition whatsoever. In the end, our gap was over 14 seconds as we crossed that finish line. Of course, giving us our first win of the week and our first tick of the week, and also rewarding us with a bonus 100,000 credits. So the payout for this one, once again, relatively low, even with that clean race bonus, 45,000 credits, and of course the 100,000 credit bonus there. The second event of the week is the Japanese Clubman Cup 550 at Alsace Village Reverse. Again, this is aimed at Japanese cars around a 550 PP rating, however it mainly aims around the Afeela concept. Of course that prototype vehicle is the main highlight car of the event and will typically be the fastest on the grid. My car of choice though would be a heavily modified Honda Civic EF, which got the job done no problem whatsoever. So let's go ahead and get into the race then. This is a 3-lap sprint on the full layout of Alsace. There's a total of 12 cars on the grid, 11 AI up in front of us. Now my main advantage here is that this Civic is incredibly lightweight and pretty powerful, putting around about 200 brake horsepower out. Adding on a set of sport soft tyres meant that getting the job done here was relatively easy without being completely overpowered. So first up was a bunch of Nissan GT-Rs, mainly R32s and R33s, as well as a Lancer Evo. Again, these are four-wheel drive cars and you would expect them to be way up the grid, but for some reason they were just hanging around at the back. They gave me no trouble whatsoever around the outside and moving up through the grid. Next up was the likes of the Honda NSX, and whilst this is usually one of the faster cars for this event, it was made short work of. Of course, the main car that we were chasing down was the Afeela prototype. I don't know if it's just the typical starting position of the car, but it did seem to absolutely blast ahead up the road, again chased down by an RX-7. So once we worked our way past the Mazda, it was time to get onto the back of the Afeela and try and get it under braking. Of course, that car incredibly heavy, and that's exactly what we do, using our lightweight Civic here to get that job done. Crossing the line there with a decent enough gap to P2 and taking a relatively easy first place. That's our second tick of the week and 90,000 credits with that clean race bonus over 10 miles travelled. Of course, no bonus for this one. So on to event number 3 then. This is the special event for the week, the Honda N1 RS1 make. Of course, very much a returning Cup car race here, this time at WeatherTech Raceway Laguna Seca, featuring the iconic corkscrew. Now, of course, previous to this, it was over at Suzuka, and it was a very dull affair, but this time I would say it is much more enjoyable overall. 4 laps, 10 cars, your specified car is the N1 RS, 80k for first, 48k for second, and 32k for third. Now, your main rival cars are the N1 RS, very much Cup car built and of course much more powerful than standard. BOP is off, you must use a garage car and car settings are allowed. As for race settings, there is no damage and both the penalty settings are set to off, so you won't have to worry about those whatsoever. Of course, my car of choice here would be a highly modified spoon liveried Honda N1 RS. So let's go ahead and get into the race itself then. So of course here we are featuring a 4-lap sprint race, so we don't have to worry about tyre or fuel use here. Now, unfortunately, I didn't balance my Honda correctly, so it was pretty overpowered for this event. I did have the lack of a high RPM turbocharger and such, but I did have all of the weight reduction and of course all of the permanent modifications as well as the aero, so it really did make this a pretty easy walk in the park. However, if you do go for a lesser modified Honda N1, then these things will be much quicker than something like the stock variant. There are definitely no pushovers when you do have it balanced correctly. Of course, the main thing you need to watch out for here is keeping it nice and steady through that iconic corkscrew. It can be incredibly technical and incredibly difficult, and again, the main thing, because these are lesser powered cars, it's really all about the momentum. If you can keep the momentum going through the entirety of a lap, you're going to be much quicker than the AI. I did notice at times they were just incredibly inconsistent, dabbing on the brakes when they didn't really need to. As you can see, I took the lead here at the beginning of lap 2 just by keeping that momentum going, getting in the slipstream and getting the overtake done. So overall, a relatively easy special event, but once again still enjoyable to see a Cup car race in Gran Turismo 7. We cross the line then at the end of lap 4 with a decent gap to the rest of the field, and of course our third tick of the week. The payout for this one actually very good, 120,000 credits with that clean race bonus, and of course 200,000 credits on top as a performance bonus for 3 events done. Our 4th event this week then is the Nissan GT-R Cup at Circuit de St. Croix on the A layout. Of course, very fitting considering the final R35 GT-R rolled off the production line only a few weeks ago, and we're going to pay homage to that car with the Nissan GT-R that we're using here, which of course is one of the premium T-specs in that beautiful midnight purple. This car is completely standard, going up against some very heavily modified Nissan GT-Rs. So let's go ahead and and get to the event then. So as we can see, this is a 3-lap sprint race on a relatively long track. A total of 16 cars on the grid, 15 AI made up of a bunch of different generations of GT-R badged vehicles, and straight away we would begin to make some moves. Now we know the T-Spec here does have the power over the majority of the field, apart from the other newer GT-Rs, which again are heavily modified, so those things are incredibly quick. However, with our GT-R being completely bone stock and the other GT-Rs right up at the front being incredibly modified, this did make for some very close racing in that final lap. It was a very exciting final lap, so all we had to do at this point was just make our way to the front of the field, and once we're up in P5, up ahead of us was 4 different R35 GT-Rs, some more modified than others. We had a GT-R Premium T-Spec, which we managed to get past with relative ease, and then the battle for a podium position began. Of course, that's exactly what we need for that 4th tick of the week, and we would leave it very late here. As you can see, we're catching up to these. We're going to go down the inside, try and get the move done. We get ourselves into P3, and for a bit of a comfort blanket, we want to aim for at least P2. I go for the move into the final corner, but unfortunately the 2017 GT-R just has much better brakes and better aero, giving it much better grip out of the corner and securing it P2. A very close finish in the end, and a very exciting race. I really enjoyed this one, surprisingly. That is our 4th tick of the week, a lower payout at 37.6k credits for that one then. So the final event of the week then is the World Touring Car 900 at Spa. This is one of the latest events to Gran Turismo 7, added with update 1.62. And just a note here, yes, it does feature variable and changing weather, so make sure to bring a set of intermediate and wet weather tyres. As for my car choice here, it would be the Peugeot Vision Gran Turismo Group 1 hybrid race car, which honestly would get the job done with no issues whatsoever. Now as for the grid, it's a total of 20 cars, 19 AI over a 10-lap race, with of course fuel, tyres and weather to contend with. Now my original strategy here would be sit in fuel mix 6 and just wait for the weather to come in. So the main thing I'm doing is just monitoring my fuel and of course monitoring the weather radar, just to see how quickly that weather is going to shift across onto the track and absolutely downpour. Now it would be relatively early in the race for me here. Inside the first few laps we would end up getting a lot of rain and it would catch out a lot of cars. So at this point it's all about just turning the engine mix up and getting as many overtakes done as possible so that I don't get caught up with all of the spinning AI here. So end of lap 1 for me, boost the engine back up, get the overtakes done and try and get myself up that grid as much as possible. However, when the rain came, it was an incredibly awkward time. In fact, I'd just gone past the start finish straight as the rain really heavily started coming down at the beginning of lap 4. So it would be catching myself out, but also the AI, which actually made getting the lead incredibly easy, since the AI will just go to an absolute crawl, snail's pace to get anywhere in the kind of wet conditions on dry tyres. So into the lead we went. At that point we just kind of, dawdled back to the pit lane, of course put on the wet weather tyres because the rain was incredibly heavy at this point, and refilled the car to full. That way we ensure we've got enough fuel to the end, and of course we can play about with the fuel mix if the track does dry up, but it wasn't looking very likely whatsoever. So into the pit box we go, on go the wet weather tyres and in goes the fuel. Now it is worth noting here, one single car did manage to pit in early, and that was a McLaren F1 GT-R. Now thankfully we do manage to come out ahead of it, so we don't actually have to contend with it, and at this point we've got clear track up ahead of us with the rest of the AI still doing their pit stops. So at this point all we need to do is just monitor the weather radar, keep the car in fuel mix 6 for as much traction as possible, and of course just crawl around to the end of the race. Again, the rain looked like it was sticking around pretty much for the majority of this race. The only thing we did need to worry about was of course the AI. When it comes to lapping them, they can get in the way quite often. However, tyre wear became such an issue on the wets as the track did start drying out in that final lap that we actually had to find all of the wet kind of patches on the side of the track to keep them as good a condition as possible, and eventually they would be fully worn as we struggled to cross the line there. But we do take the win with relative ease. The 5th tick of the week. Didn't get the clean race bonus here, but we do get 300,000 credits and of course 500k bonus here. Now let's go ahead and open up our rewards for this week then. We're going to start off with the daily, which was a 4-star. Now I didn't actually unlock this during the weekly challenges. I unlocked it prior because I was doing some time trial, but we still unlocked it today. So we're going to go ahead and open it up. And of course, as always, it was a massive disappointment, giving us only 10,000 credits. So really not worth the time there. But then of course, we do have the bonuses. For one event, it was 100,000 credits. Of course, next up is for completing 3 events. That is 200,000 credits, and then of course after that, for completing all 5 events this week, it's 500,000 credits on top of our winnings, taking our total to 93.344 million credits. Not too shabby if you ask me then. So there we go, that is the set of weekly challenges for this week. Of course it will reset next Friday. Let me know what you think. I personally enjoyed it. It was quite a short and sweet week overall. A massive thank you to all of my channel members on screen now, and a massive thank you to you guys watching at home. Have a great start to your weekend. Take care guys. Peace.